Hi, welcome to Why Like Ike. I'm Dennis Weiss at work for Eagle Communications. These fine fellows work for all of us here at the Eisenhower Presidential Library Museum and Boyhood Home. Tim Reeves, Jim English, and we have the Eisenhower boy years to talk about today.
Absolutely.
Should be fun, right?
Oh, it's a great story.
Okay, great stories. The artifacts, we always put artifacts out here for Why Like Ike because this is a museum. Chinese checkers, AHS footstool.
Abilene High School.
Yep.
Fun story. They never knew who made this one for sure because it only said Eisenhower on the bottom. And when they found this one for the museum, 5 of the boys were there together and they argued for 2 hours over which one actually made this stool. And they all claimed it all the way through life.
Sure.
We never did know for sure which boy made this one.
Yeah, isn't that the story of today?
Absolutely.
This family behind us on the picture was maybe at the historical view such a significant family, but in the picture they're just brothers.
That's right.
And mother and father, and they grew up right here in Abilene, Kansas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool story. All right, tell us something fun to kick it off.
Well, there are always stories of the Eisenhower family. One of the fun ones for me was that kind of catapulted Ike's personality is when he first went to grade school. Of course, school was just across the street,
Sure.
From where he lived. And he came tearing across the playground one day and was bawling his eyes out. And his dad met him at the gate and grabbed him by the shirt collar and said, "Well, what's wrong?" And he goes, "That boy wanted to fight with me and you told me to never fight." And David grabbed him by the collar, turned him around. I said, "I told you never to start a fight. Now, go back and finish it." Ike went back in on the playground and finished the fight while his brother Arthur watched over him because the boy's older brother was also there. And the Eisenhower boys were never going to let anybody take the better of them. There was always another one around to defend them.
Heard that story in my own life, generational thing. That was my dad's admonition as well. Never start a fight, but always be there to finish it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The expectation of finishing was there. Well, the Eisenhower family all were great finishers, weren't they?
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah, it's amazing how well those boys all did. I think it's probably maybe captured in a well-known quote by Ida when after Ike, the Ike we're all familiar with, became so well-known, and she was asked, "Aren't you proud of your son?" And she said, "Which one?"
Right.
Because they were also successful, beginning with Arthur, the oldest brother, who became a vice president executive at Commerce Bank in Kansas City, and brother Edgar, successful attorney in Tacoma, Washington, brother Roy over in Junction City with his pharmacy, brother Earl, an engineer and media executive, and then of course Milton, who became very well known in his own right as a college administrator and government official. So
I don't think my mom would have had that struggle. Which one of your boys are you so proud of?
Were you an only child?
No. There's the problem. No, but we're so blessed to have the repository of Dwight David Eisenhower, including the stories, but they're accessible to everybody. We filmed this show expressly to let people know what they can see, what they can hear, and what they can access here. And we put you guys, the experts, in the chairs to be able to tell the stories, to talk about the things, talk about the history, because you never know where the next Dwight David Eisenhower is. Could be in Abilene, Kansas.
That's right.
And so the expectation of, he didn't start out as a president of the United States or a 5-star general, he started out as a boy.
That's right.
In a little house right over there.
Well, that's one thing that's so amazing about our holdings. Of course, growing up, they didn't know he would grow up to be Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander and President of the United States, but we really do have a lot related to his boyhood. A number of photographs from that time period, a letter or two that he wrote as a boy. Of course, all these great artifacts that were still in the home at the time, but it became an attraction to visitors. It's interesting to me that you do see something here like this game because there wasn't much money for this sort of thing in the Eisenhower's family. In fact, most of the either toys or sports equipment that the brothers wanted, they had to raise their own money with a half-acre vegetable garden that they grew on the east side of the home. And so this would be almost a luxury item, I believe, with the Eisenhower family at that time, which makes it of interest to me.
Yes, that's so much of who they were. You know, the history is about recording the facts, and the facts of the Eisenhower legacy starts at a place where there are roughly 6,500 people today who are in the same circumstance, living in Abilene, Kansas, going about their daily lives, raising a family, doing the common things. Games may look a little different, but there you can still find a nice Chinese checkerboard game around town, I'm sure. But the Eisenhowers were just a local family when they started off in the Boyhood home. And I have to think with all those boys, boy, this rivalry must have been interesting.
Well, it certainly is an interesting element to evaluate all the boys. You start with Arthur, who was the oldest, and certainly did take the role of the older brother, but much more of a standoffish brother. He was probably the bookwormish one of the older brothers. The biggest rivalries that we study is certainly between Dwight and Edgar. Dwight and Edgar at it their entire lives, all the way up through his presidency. I just recently saw a letter that Dwight wrote to his brother Edgar after Edgar had criticized him for his horrible presidential policies and that he probably should be impeached. Edgar was very, very, very far left, you know, very, very, very strong in his beliefs, and felt that Dwight just wasn't doing the job properly. You can go all the way back into early times and find those kind of stories. At one point, two of the boys always cooked the Sunday dinner. It's one of the wonderful things I love about this family is that Ida taught all 6 of her boys how to mend their own socks, how to repair their clothes, how to cook on an old coal-burning stove. So 2 of them were assigned the task on a rotating basis to cook the Sunday dinner. And one time that they were supposedly preparing the dinner, got into a tussle and were literally duking it out on the floor in the kitchen, and Mom was standing there, and Milton came into the home and got all upset because his brothers were going to hurt each other, but Ida grabbed Milton by the collar and said, nope, stand back, just let them have at it, they'll solve it for themselves. And that's kind of the way the family operated. They certainly always looked out for each other. The rivalry on the sports fields between Edgar and Dwight, some of the huge rivalries.
How far apart were they?
A year.
1 year.
Just a year.
And Edgar was clearly envious of his younger brother's success. And you could see it in those letters that Jim referred to, where he's very critical of him politically. And of course, Edgar was part of the old guard of the Republican Party, you know, which had really contested his brother, you know, for the nomination that year, which is another interesting point of contention between the two men. And Edgar liked to talk about how he was the first Ike, and that was his nickname, and then his little brother became better known. So they were just, you know, almost anywhere he could, I think Edgar liked to take a dig at Ike, the better known Ike.
In 1926, one of the 2 famous pictures that we have of the boys all lined up together in the same order, one in 1902, one in 1926. Ike had just graduated from the Command and General Staff College.
Right behind you there, Jim.
That was taken at the same time that this picture was taken.
Okay. Yeah.
I think we saw that in the Boyhood home.
That's
right.
That's right.
Ike kept needling Edgar all the time. Now, by this time, Dwight was 36 years old, Edgar 37, and Edgar was constantly trying to steer away from Ike because Ike had roused his ire at his brother, saying, I can beat you. Let's go fight. Let's go out and wrestle. I can fight. You know, I can beat you. And Edgar kept moving away from him because he knew at that age that probably Ike could beat him, and he wasn't going to have that.
It's interesting. You know, we're filming this on the anniversary of the authorization of the Bill of Rights, not its creation, but when it was ratified.
Correct.
So, you know, from the founding of our country to the election that we just went through, it always amazes me that people say, oh, it's so acrimonious, these politics. When has it not been?
Right.
Exactly.
When has it not
Exactly.
been?
Even within a family, as we can see,
Even
like
within
the Eisenhower
the
brothers.
family. We say this to each other, I think, probably, and we're all used to it, but you never know who's tuning in. It could be a first-time viewer who hadn't even thought about Dwight David Eisenhower ever in their life. You know, how important is it that we have these things, these stories, and the relevance. Why is Chinese checkers? Well, because the little boy that comes with Grandpa to visit here, he may not think anything about five-star generals, but he goes Chinese checkers. So the President of the United States played Chinese checkers. You don't know what will link to
Right.
people's interest or
You really don't.
to their stimulus.
When we give Boyhood home tours, I think one of the most awe-inspiring spots for visitors is when we get to the back parlor. You know, it's about a 10 by 10 foot room. And we talk about the fact that it was always separated from the front parlor. They used that living room as their nightly place to play together. They always met together. And everybody looks around and goes, but there's only 2 chairs in the room. Well, 6 boys spread out on the floor because first,
There wouldn't have been room for 8 chairs.
that's right.
Yeah.
And the first thing they did was to pass the Bible from one to the next, to do Bible reading. And even that was a competitive art in this family. Ida had memorized so much of the Bible that it was her expectation that her boys could do just as well. And the rule in the house was that you read until you made a mistake.
Wow.
So the boys didn't want to ire their mother or make a mistake, so sometimes those Bible readings could go on for a while.
And I'm sorry, Jen, didn't mean to interrupt you there, but President Eisenhower said that really helped them in school because reading aloud in school was a major part of their grade school,
Right.
grammar school curriculum. So it,
Reading aloud today, whether you're reading or speaking from your heart and mind, is so important for success today. If you look at, we're in the communication generation, right? Everybody's got a smartphone. You can communicate with anybody in the world anytime.
Right.
But the essence of communication, adding value to any process, is no more or less important today than it was then. And that is hugely important.
that's right.
Yeah. Eisenhower, you hear words spoken of him as a general, that he was able to communicate, I think, of Montgomery in one corner and Patton in the other. How would you like to have been in the middle of those guys? So, you know, I think we're here to talk about the boys and their family life. I would imagine that putting up with Edgar prepared him for conflict at the tightest level
It had
to
to
be able to
It
resolve
had to.
that.
Absolutely.
And that's what's so interesting. You look back to the boyhood period, and as they say, the boy is the father to the man. And so you can look back to Ike's boyhood and see so many of these things that later became so important and relevant to his career in the Army and in politics.
Yeah.
One of the biggest stories that is a legacy is Ike and his temper. He had a horrible, horrible temper his whole life and worked very hard to control it. But he always had one fallback moment that he always fell back to in memory. At 8, his 2 older brothers had been invited to a Halloween party, and he felt that he should have been allowed to go, and his mother had said no. So we went out to where they had the orchard, just northeast of the house, found an old dead apple tree, and was literally beating on it with his fists until his fist became bloody. Well, his father came in, saw him doing this, and asked him why. It made his father angry, so his father cut a maple switch and made his bottom look like his fist looked like. Ike, at this point, of course, bleeding, went up to his room, had been crying for about 3 hours, and his mother finally came up with some medication, some salve to put on both wounded areas, and read him a Bible quote about controlling your temper. And he remembered that his whole life.
Great lesson, great story. You can't rise to higher stature in America than Dwight David Eisenhower did, both civilian life and military life.
Yeah, he reached the top. And
He reached the top, right? But that story connects him to struggles, to failures in his life that he had to
things to overcome, exactly.
Things to overcome.
Right.
So you look at the greatness of the man, those formative years in the picture behind us and the stories and the artifacts in front of us, you know, that certainly made the man, didn't it, Tim?
It really did. Another lesson he wrote about from those schoolyard days and the fighting that went on was that, you know, you can't let a bully intimidate you. You have to call his bluff. And he applied those lessons later as president and as general. So it was a very important time, of course, in his upbringing here. Another interesting thing about Dwight Eisenhower, and I was just in Texas at his birthplace.
Okay.
And of those 7 brothers, Ike was the only one born outside of Kansas, and yet ironically, he's the one most identified with the state of Texas, but the brothers referred to him as the renegade Texan. Even though he lived there such a short period of time,
Known as the only foreign-born son in the family.
and Texas is very proud of Dwight Eisenhower's birth in Denison.
That's funny. You know, inside my own brothers and sisters, you know, I can identify with that story. You know, you find things that make you different, or people will use to poke you or prod you. It isn't necessarily bad. It's just the way families are.
Right.
I think the value of this opportunity is to say, common man, uncommon ending.
Yeah, that's a very good way to phrase it.
Yeah. Oh, what's in the box? I have
You've got the gloves.
I do have the gloves.
Another fun game that they knew how to play.
Them on.
They
I think I could guess by the size of it. I'll bet they're little square things.
They are.
See if Dave can get a shot at dominoes.
Yes.
My grandma loved dominoes. We would play it at her house all the time. Don't recall ever winning a game. So tell us about dominoes.
Just another one of the games that they had. You know, the options for game after Bible reading was when they had their family entertainment time. So
Lone Star, I'm sorry, Jim, but isn't that interesting? Another Texas reference here in the domino box.
Yeah, but the picture, well, I started to say the picture's not a Texas because you got pine trees on one side and a gulf with three masters, ships in the harbor there.
Some piney woods.
I'd say that's not Texas, but what a great representation. A little pack string, got a cabin, from sea to shining sea, it kind of looks like to me.
I think that's what the theme there is.
Well, that's terrific. Wow.
But Jim, as you were saying, that was
And I got to hold it.
one thing they could do after their Bible reading was participate in some family activities like a game.
The most common one, of course, always was Ida's piano. She was so proud of that piano. When you recognize what she paid for that as a 21-year-old, 2 years before her marriage, had inherited some money from her own grandfather and spent $600 to have that piano hand custom made.
Huge sum at that time.
You know, translatable today, about $16,000 in today's dollars. But that was one of the most common entertainments. The boys would get up off the floor, gather around Mom, and they'd sing at the piano, regardless of whether they could sing or not. Ike's reputation for that, kind of famous through the years of people going.
Like to sing old Army songs at parties and that kind of thing. And I believe Milton was the only one who ever developed any kind of proficiency on the piano.
But they all played, didn't they?
No.
I think she
Nope.
attempted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I remember from the Boyhood home tour, like Mom made them all try or something.
Right, yeah.
They gave lessons. Or
Yeah,
they had to
the
give
story
it a
is
try.
that Dwight lasted about 20 minutes before Mom's patience wore out, and he took off out the back door to go play ball.
Well, we've got 2 minutes left to wrap up the Boyhood of Dwight David Eisenhower. How do you do that in 2 minutes?
Well, I'd say another one of those continuities from the boyhood to adulthood are games. Eisenhower loved games, and as an adult would play Scrabble with Mamie, and then of course loved cards early on, poker, and then bridge. But you know, he was very sociable. He liked these kind of group recreational activities. So I think again, you see it going back to his earliest days.
Well, I have to tell you that continuity is still going on in Abilene today. They have game nights down at Great Plains Theater now, and people are just showing up to do this.
Old-fashioned games, not
Old-fashioned games.
not apps on their
These
phones.
things. Nope, they just come and play board games and things
Absolutely.
like this. So again, Dwight David Eisenhower, so relevant to everything we do in Abilene.
He would have fit right in.
Fit right in. Wouldn't that have been great to have him? Yeah. Okay, guys, we had a great time talking about the young Eisenhowers and how important their family life was in Abilene, Kansas. We're so happy to have a chance to bring this to you at home on your television set and on your internet appliance. I'm Dennis Weiss. I work for Eagle Communication. Mr. English and Mr. Reeves work for you at the Abilene one and only Eisenhower Presidential Library, Museum, and Boyhood Home. Had a great time. Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
Dennis.
Thank you, Dennis.
We'll see you next time. Have a great day.